Hello and welcome to Interview with a Ranger with Leigh and Adam.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, there we go. And this is for the hashtag friendship.
Woo!
So today we're going to be looking at the overview of the Ranger and what it's like. So do you want to sum up pretty much the overview of the Ranger and the general playstyle?
Okay, well, it's in the name. It's a ranger. The whole idea is to be at range, to use bows or stuff like that. But in Guild Wars 1, you could be a trapper, you could focus on a pet, or you could just focus on yourself doing as much damage as possible. Now in Guild Wars 2 they've kind of mixed it up a little bit. Now traps are all utility skills. The pet is mandatory. You get two pets actually at once, and you get two underwater as well. And really what you have to do as a ranger is distance yourself from the enemy and stay at range and use your pet as kind of a shield,
Mm-hmm.
so he will absorb the damage hopefully to the best of its ability. I would recommend maybe a bear or something like that to tank while you stay back.
Okay, so that's kind of survivability, but what about your main source of damage? Does it come through damage spikes or crits, or does it come through things like DPS?
It's mainly DPS, lots of bleeding with the short bow. The short bow's spam attack, if you'll call it that, puts bleeding on whenever you attack from the back or side. So you use your pet to take the aggro, then you flank the enemy. There's actually a trait skill which lets you do more damage as you flank. So it all kind of adds up. You can also poison and cripple and daze with a short bow.
And OP's, poison's pretty OP at the minute, so it's a heavy damage dealer and great for dungeons and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very good. On your own, you're very fragile, very poor survivability. But once you're in a group, like in a dungeon or something, you're kind of a vital part of it. Just the
Yeah.
amount of DPS you can do. It's something that I would look for in a dungeon group if I wasn't a ranger. But
Yeah, well, personally, I know that whenever I'm running a dungeon group and there's going to be a major boss at the end, I'm going to want a ranger in the team for DPS.
yeah, we're very useful for taking down bosses and stuff, but just PvE generally, it's high level areas are very difficult to stay alive in sometimes.
Yeah. So, what do you think are the main strengths of the ranger then?
Um, I would say the main strengths are the DPS and the fact that in a group they can work so well. They have an AoE heal, which can remove conditions, but they can also use a warhorn to give boons and stuff. They're really just good at being part of a unit and
Mhm.
having other people take the aggro basically. They're really oriented at flanking the enemy and doing damage that way. You don't want to be up in their face. You might be tempted to use a melee weapon, but that's really not what you want to be doing.
Would that be one of the weaknesses
Oh,
then?
definitely. It's very, very poor solo, very poor survivability, and if you put yourself in the mix with like a sword or a great sword, you're not going to do very well. Short bow, long bow, and axe are probably your best choice.
So, why would you pick those weapons?
Well, the short bow's got really good DPS, as I said before, lots of conditions, fast attacks. If you want to orient yourself to crits, you can rack up a lot of damage in a short amount of time because of the fast attacks as well. But the long bow, it's much slower, but it's really meant to be at range. You do more damage the further away you are, and it also has an AoE skill. Um, an axe and warhorn, axe can tag three enemies at once and cause bleeding, so that's more DPS. But the warhorn supplies boons for everybody around you, so that's might, fury, and swiftness.
It seems pretty useful. What about your utility skills as well?
Well, for utility, I use Quickening Zephyr, first of all. Quickening Zephyr is probably one of the main skills for a ranger. You can't get healed while you're under its effect, but for 4 seconds, you attack much quicker. Everything you do is sped up. And the second one, I use Lightning Reflexes. Now, that's a sort of a little damage burst around you, and then you shoot backwards. And it also gives you Vigor. Now, the Vigor's kind of useful for dodging, but it's mainly just to get yourself out of there and allow your pet to get back in there to take aggro again. And the last one, I would generally switch it up, but I use Sick 'em to try and get my pet to do a lot of damage, because people don't really mention it, but pets do a lot of damage compared to what the actual bow or whatever does.
Hmm. Seems quite useful. And with all your utilities and things like that, there obviously you're going to need traits to power those kind of things. So what kind of traits would you use, and how do they really help your trait, or how do they help your utility skills?
Well, as you can see here, I'm just going to show you my trait setup. I've got 30 in Wilderness Survival or Toughness, 30 in Nature Magic or Vitality, and 10 in Beast Mastery, which is Healing Power and Pet Skills. So Wilderness Survival gives condition damage. Now that is vital if you want to be a ranger. The condition duration from power isn't really useful because you attack so fast. It doesn't really matter because you're constantly applying it. And nature magic is really just to get extra survivability. You want to be able to last as long as possible. The boon duration for the Warhorn is also very, very useful. And if you want, you can do more damage while under the effect of a boon if you go that high. So 25 trait points gets you more damage while under a boon. And I would recommend for any ranger to have 5 trait points in Beast Mastery no matter what, because whenever you swap your pet, if it's downed or whatever, you get 2 extra seconds of Quickening Zephyr. So that's very useful.
Yeah, it seems like it's pretty useful. So overall, how do you think the class is? How would you sum it up?
It's a good class for DPS. Works well in a group. Like I've said before, it can be supportive of other members, but really it's quite difficult late game. Early game you can be using melee, you can use sword, you can use great sword, but as soon as you get to higher levels, stuff starts to aggro a lot easier. It's much easier to die, you take a lot more damage, and even once you get to high level Risen, your pet stops being a shield altogether because they just ignore it. So basically your best bet is to just stick with short bow and survivability skills, just trying to keep yourself alive, because that's really, for medium armor classes, that seems to be quite difficult at the minute. But really overall I would say it's good early game, but it can be frustrating late game if you're going solo everything.
Yeah, so would you recommend the class, or would you rather pick an awesome warrior like mine?
I think for a beginner, something like a warrior or an elementalist would probably be better. It's not something I would say you shouldn't pick for a beginner. I'm just saying that it can be challenging late game if you've really got no experience with other classes.
Yeah. Well, that was great. Thanks very much for explaining. Hopefully it helps some people out.
Hopefully. Well, I've been Adam.
And I'm
This
Leigh.
has been the Friendship Awesome Gaming Show, and I will see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.